Hey, this is Mike from musclelife.com, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. Thanks for stopping by and taking some time to hang out with me. In this episode, I'm going to be doing a Q&A, or I'm going to be doing another Q&A episode where I take a couple questions off of my Google Moderator page, which allows people to submit questions and then vote up or down on other questions that people have submitted, kind of like Reddit, but for questions. So then every few weeks, I go through it and find what are the new and popular questions that people want answered and talk about them. So today's questions, I have two that are a bit longer in their explanation, in their answers. That's why there's only two. But the first one is regarding when cutting. How does your energy expenditure change, and how do you adjust for that? What are the factors that are involved, and then how do you make sure that you continue to lose fat and can actually, that you don't stall out and then not know what to do? And the other question is kind of a segue from that is it healthy to do like cycles of bulking and cutting where you're in a slight calorie surplus, gaining fat, and then you flip to a slight deficit to lose fat? What are the long-term implications of that health-wise? Are there any? And if so, what do you do about it? So let's get right in. The first question comes from Chris and from the UK. And Chris says, when cutting and losing fat, the calculated TDEE, total daily energy expenditure, changes downwards each week. Should my daily calories be adjusted downwards each week also? So the first part is how your energy expenditure changes. Yes, it's true. When you're in a calorie deficit, and even if you're doing everything right, if you are not over-exercising, you're not in too large of a deficit, so you're in a moderate deficit. I like to be, I'd say, moderately aggressive with a 20 to 25% deficit, because I've spoken about this before, that I'm really not a fan of slow cutting, as it's called, which is where you maintain a very slight deficit, maybe 5 or 10%, and you're going to be in that slight deficit for obviously quite a bit of time to lose at least if you have to lose a significant amount of fat, then it's going to take quite a while if you're in a 5 or 10% deficit, if you're looking at it on a daily or even weekly basis. I'm not a fan of that because there's just really no benefit to it, other than if you really don't do well with a more aggressive, larger deficit. And I can't say I've ever really actually run into, out of the thousands of people that I've spoken with, nothing comes to mind where I've come across somebody who really can't deal well enough with a moderate deficit to have to do a very slight deficit. Obviously you might be a little bit more hungry, or it might be a little bit less enjoyable to be in a 25% deficit than a 5% deficit. But what you're gaining in the larger deficit is, one, if you are if you're weightlifting or engaging in regular resistance training, especially if you're lifting heavy while you're in a deficit, and if you're not doing too much cardio and you're eating enough protein, you're going to preserve your muscle. I've written about this. I'll link an article down below where I've written about this. Basically, because there's a one study in particular that performed with resistance trained men that showed that you can run that larger deficit if you're lifting and you're eating a high protein diet, and you will lose very little to no muscle, and you'll just lose fat faster. So that's really the benefit of the larger deficit. Is when I'm in a calorie deficit, my goal is to lose the fat as quickly as possible so I can get out of a deficit and back into maintenance, or if you're going to be moving into a surplus, depending on what you want to do with your body. Me, I'm in a maintenance kind of mode. So either I will eat around my maintenance calories, which are about 2,800 on a day-to-day basis, or I will overeat by a little bit on my training days and then be in a slight deficit 2 days a week, usually on my rest days, to balance my intake for the week. Now, if I were bulking, obviously I'd just be in a slight surplus every day. But the point is, when you're a deficit, you're not going to build any muscle to speak of unless you're brand new to training. Your workouts kind of get shitty. At first, for the first 4 weeks, 3-4 weeks, you probably shouldn't notice much of a difference. You probably continue making strength gains, and it's like nothing has really changed. But in my experience with my body and just with working with a lot of people, once you start getting into the 5 to 6 week range of being in a deficit, you start to notice it in your training. You plateau off. You're not making any gains anymore. You're basically just going in the gym every week to do the exact same thing that you did last week in terms of sets and reps. Your energy levels are a little bit lower in the gym, and as you continue, you may actually lose a couple reps on your big lifts, which is normal. It doesn't mean you're losing muscle. It just is normal. I mean, when you're cutting, your carb intake is going to be lower, period, because your fat intake, unless there's just really no reason to go high fat if you are weightlifting regularly. So really your carbs are what change the most. And when you take your carbs from, let's say, 450 grams a day to 250 grams a day, that's going to affect your training, even if it's just because your glycogen levels are going to be lower. Glycogen in your liver, glycogen in your muscles, and that's your body's fuel for that anaerobic power that it needs. And when total body glycogen stores decline, you notice that in the gym. So the point is, that's also why I'm a fan of supplementation when I'm cutting, with stuff that's actually proven to work, like caffeine and synephrine, and the things you'll find in like my fat burners, Phoenix, and then a new one, Forge. Basically, Forge, Phoenix has several things, has synephrine and a couple other similar type of compounds that work synergistically to increase basal metabolic rate. It has forskolin, which is associated with increased, just accelerated fat loss. Basically, it has 5-HTP to help with cravings and stuff. So that's kind of like Phoenix is. I took a chunk of molecules that have good science, or a variety of molecules that have good science that are going to help you. Primarily, they're just going to raise your metabolic rate. They're going to help you burn an extra, like 1 serving of Phoenix per day should be able to, and this is based on good research that you can go see for yourself over at Legion, Legion, athletics.com, and go look at Phoenix, and you can see all the research. But 1 serving of Phoenix a day should increase your basal metabolic rate by about 150 to 200 calories. And, that's significant. If it's 7 days a week, that's almost an extra half pound of fat loss just from 4 pills in a day. And many people actually do 2 servings because the only stimulant in Phoenix is synephrine, which is a very mild stimulant. There's no caffeine. And I did that intentionally. I wanted it caffeine-free because I want to get my caffeine from pre-workout mainly. I don't want to get caffeine from just pills. I want to, and a lot of people, if you drink coffee or whatever, you want to get your caffeine from coffee when you're cutting. You don't want to have to give up half your coffee because these weight loss pills have caffeine in them. Anyway, so that's Phoenix. And then Forge, the main ingredient in terms of fat loss is yohimbine, which I also really like. I'm a fan of fasted training when I'm cutting, mainly because the mechanisms and the hormones that are related to fat loss work best in a fasted state when insulin levels are low. So you can expect to lose a little bit more fat from your workouts that are done in a fasted state. But I think the real benefit is that any supplementation that affect those mechanisms and hormones is even more effective when you're in a fasted state. So stuff like caffeine, stuff like synephrine, and the other ingredients in Phoenix and yohimbine, which is in Forge, are maximally effective in this state. And in fact, yohimbine doesn't even work. If your insulin levels are elevated, if you eat a bunch of food and then take yohimbine, it's not going to do anything. So that's why I recommend these things when people are cutting. Use a moderate, but aggressive calorie deficit. If you have the budget for it, spend $100 on, or really, less really, but spend whatever, $80 to $100 on these supplements, and just lose that fat as quickly as possible so you can get back to eating enough food to have good workouts, basically. And especially if you're trying to build muscle, or if you're trying to build strength, because if you're in a deficit, even if it's a slight deficit, if you run that 5%, 10% deficit for 4 months, let's say, to lose the fat you need to lose, you're not going to build much muscle, if any, when you're in that deficit, unless you're brand new. And again, you're going to run into the training issues. Maybe it takes 2 months for those training issues to hit you, but you're going to deal with it eventually. So I'm much more a fan of being aggressive and cutting that in half. And so if I'm already not going to build muscle and strength, I'd rather just get it over with in 2 months, lose all the fat that I need to lose, and then reverse diet if I need to. Basically just get my calories back into a range where I can start making gains again. So it's kind of a tangent, but just something I wanted to reiterate. I've written about it and spoken about it before, but it's an important point, so I want to say it again in case you haven't come across it. So getting back to the question, let's talk about now how things change. So when you're in a deficit, your basal metabolic rate does slow down over time. It's not as pronounced as many people think. You're not damaging your metabolism. If you look at something like the Minnesota starvation study or the starvation experiment from World War II, you have guys that were eating like 1,600, 1,700, max 1,800 calories. Actually, might have been lower. It's been a while since I read that paper, but it may have been as low as 1,500 calories a day, actually. Doing hard labor for like 8 hours a day, and these guys were starving themselves basically. And this was research done to basically see how to best deal with these prisoners of war that have been starved down to nothing for years. How do you bring them back into a normal metabolism? How do you start refeeding them the way that the body needs to be fed? How do you get the body working correctly again, basically? So even in that case, we had guys starved down to 4 or 5% body fat, just burn, no muscle. They looked like, some of these guys looked like Auschwitz fucking people. How in those extreme conditions, the metabolic slowdown was still the largest, was like 15 or 20% or something like that, in terms of how much quote unquote damage was done to their metabolisms. So the takeaway from that is, yes, your metabolism does inherently slow down when you are restricting your calories, but it's not that significant. You're looking at maybe a slowdown of a couple hundred calories per day in terms of burning. So, my basal metabolic rate is about 2,200 calories. So if I were to go diet now for 10 weeks, let's say, and by the end of that, maybe I'm burning 1,900 calories, 1,800 calories or something like that. Basal metabolic rate is the amount of energy you burn with your body at rest. So yes, that matters, but it's not a huge problem. That said, though, it is something that you need to adjust for. Now, the more the changes that matter more are actually more related to how much energy your body's expending or burning every day, because that changes actually quite a bit more than your basal metabolic rate. And one of the reasons for that is, and this is research has shown, that when you're in a calorie deficit, you naturally engage in less spontaneous activity. So you're moving around and you're fidgeting and you get up to do this, you get up to that, you bob your leg. Those are all like spontaneous energy burning activities that you do subconsciously. You don't really think about it. And some people are very, they naturally engage in a lot of these types of activities, and you can actually burn a lot of calories. Research has shown that in the extreme, when you look at somebody with a very low spontaneous activity level versus a very high, it can be as much as a 2,000 calorie day difference in terms of burning. Now that's obviously, you're looking at two ends of the spectrum. If you go down the middle, if I remember correctly, on some of the papers I had read, that you're looking at, on average, maybe about a 300 to 400 calorie swing when you look at where most people are in terms of a distribution and how much energy they're burning in spontaneous activity. But even that's quite a bit. I mean, if somebody is burning 400 calories more per day just by fidgeting and doing things that they didn't really think about than somebody else, you extrapolate that out over a week, and you're looking at like 2/3 of a pound of fat that would be lost by that activity. So when you're in a calorie deficit, though, that activity just naturally, your body wants to preserve or conserve energy, so you just engage in less of that. So there's that. That's one thing you have to take into account, that you are naturally just going to be moving less and burning less energy. There is that your body actually burns less energy during exercise when you're in a calorie deficit, and there's also research showing that. So you're not burning as much energy during your workouts. And also there's something to consider called the thermic effect of food, which is the energy costs of metabolizing food, of digesting and breaking down and absorbing food. And like for instance, 1 gram of carbohydrate, it costs about a quarter of the energy contained in that gram of food or carbohydrate to process it, just for example. So the thermic effect of food goes down when you're in a calorie deficit because you're eating less food. So when you're eating more food, your body's just burning more energy having to process all that food. You restrict that food intake, obviously your body's burning less energy. And as you restrict as you bring your calories down over time when you're cutting, which you have to do, and we'll talk about in a minute, that of course gets less and less. So those are the factors you're kind of dealing with when you're cutting, and that affect your total daily energy expenditure, your TDEE. And in terms of cutting your calories. So you start cutting, right? So let's say that you're burning about 3,000 calories a day, your weight's steady, that's more or less what you eat, and you're going to start out at 2,400 calories a day or maybe 2,300 calories a day to start losing weight. So you do that, and then 4 weeks go by, and your waist is shrinking, which is a good sign. Your weight is going down, which is of course a good sign. Your caliper readings, if you're doing that, which I would recommend that you do, and I'll link an article down below on body fat percentage, measuring body fat percentage, and how I do it and why I recommend you do it. And because those are I do recommend that. Just another little tangent that'll be helpful to you is when you're dieting to lose fat, unless you are an experienced dieter, then obviously you either know these things or it's just not necessary. You just go by the mirror. But if you're kind of new and you want to make sure that you're doing it right, weigh yourself every day and then take an average weight every 7 to 10 days. Don't do one weekly weigh-in, because you could just have a bad weigh-in. You could be holding more water from maybe you had more sodium than usual the day before, more potassium than the day before, and then you're holding more water. So weigh yourself every day and then average that every 7 to 10 days, and you go off that average. You want to see that average going down. Take your waist measurement at the navel, because that's basically the single most reliable indicator of fat loss is that your waist is shrinking. And yes, it shrinks slower than, you're going to lose fat quicker in certain areas of your body than others, because certain fat is stubborn in a sense, and that's maybe the subject for another podcast, but I've written about it as well, so I'll link an article down below. But basically certain fat cells respond better to your body's chemicals that it makes to mobilize and burn fat than others. Certain fat cells, those chemicals, they're resistant to them, I guess you could say. But if your waist is shrinking, that's a reliable indicator. And then calipering is a good idea as well. Being consistent, of course, in how you're measuring, it will give you a consistent reading in millimeters. And if you keep an eye on those things, your average weight, your waist, circumference at the navel, and your caliper readings, then you will have the whole picture and you'll be able to really know what's happening. So then if your average weight is not changing, but your waist is shrinking and your caliper readings are improving, then you are either gaining muscle and losing fat at the same time, or you are gaining water weight and glycogen, which in certain ways you would register as gaining muscle, but that's not really muscle, obviously. But basically what you're looking at is you've lost fat, but that weight that you would see on the scale has been replaced with something, either muscle or just water and glycogen. That's kind of on the measuring side of things. And in regards to how do you adjust, so basically let's say you start at 2,300 calories, back to the earlier example, and you go for 4 weeks, let's say, and your measurements are improving. So you don't change anything. If you're losing a half a pound to a pound of fat a week, which is what you want, or if you're seeing steady improvements in your measurements, in your waist and in your caliper readings, then you don't need to change anything. You just keep on doing what you're doing. If, however, you go for 2 or 3 weeks and nothing changes in your measurements, your weight hasn't gone down, or your waist measurement or your caliper readings haven't changed, then you need to change something. And you need to either move more or eat less. Those are your only options. In terms of moving more, you can only do that so much before it becomes counterproductive, because putting your body in a calorie deficit is already stressful as it is. You start adding a ton of exercise on it and it becomes very stressful. So personally, what I've found with my body and just working with a lot of people, I cap out at 5 hours of weightlifting and 2 hours of high intensity interval cardio per week when I'm in a calorie deficit. I don't do any more than that. And that's usually in the end when I'm trying to squeeze out the last bits. I actually try to keep it closer to 4 hours of weightlifting and about an hour and a half of cardio per week. But it's somewhere in there. And some people I've found, just in working with people, can get away with more because their bodies just deal really well with the stress of it, I guess. And some people's bodies don't. So I would say to play it safe, cap your exercise out there. And if you have the feeling, and there is a bit of like you start to know your body the more you get into this, and the more you do these things and manipulate your exercise and manipulate your diet. And you can just kind of get ideas about things. You just know, you know what I mean? Sometimes you'll feel your body, both sides. You'll be like, I'm doing too much. I just can feel it. I feel a bit fatigued and I don't want to be in the gym. I'm not enjoying my workouts. Maybe you need to cut it back a little bit. Or you just know, like, I feel great. I really feel like I could do a bit more. So you add a little bit. So I always first want to move more rather than eat less. So when I'm cutting, I just start out at max. I start out at 4 to 5 hours of weightlifting, 1.5 to 2 hours of cardio per week. And I start out with all the supplements that I've talked about, and I just go as hard as I can right from the beginning. Let's go. Let's get rid of this fat as quickly as possible, basically. But if some people don't like to do that, or some people can't schedule-wise, like they only, for the first month, they're only going to be able to exercise 3 hours per week, and then they're going to have some time free up so they can add some exercise, and that's fine. But once you have your movement maxed out, so you can't exercise any more than you're exercising without causing issues, and you're still not, losing weight or improving on your measurements for 2 or 3 weeks, then it's time to eat less. And there's, you can expect, if you want to get really lean, if you're a guy wanting to get under 10% body fat, and you are above, I would say, if you're 15%, or if you're above 13%, and you want to get below 10%, you're probably going to have to reduce your calorie intake at some point. You're not going to be able to just do it with, your initial deficit plus exercise. Things will just get so slow that it becomes counterproductive again, where it becomes a slow cutting thing, where you're going to be now waiting for 2 months to lose what you could have lost in 3 weeks or 4 weeks if you would have just been a bit more aggressive in reducing your intake. And if you're a girl, I would say if you want to get under 20% and you're anywhere 23% and up, it's going to be the same thing. You're going to have to reduce your food intake from that initial deficit at some point. So in terms of how to do it, I like to do it very simply. So I have my initial deficit, I go, and I find that with my body, that lasts about 6 weeks. It's about 6 weeks where I steadily lose, and then things just get slower, and I just start seeing very minor changes. Maybe I'll lose a quarter of a pound in a week and see a very slight change in the mirror. And then what I do is I cut my calories by my daily intake by 100. I just remove 25 grams of carbs, because my fat intake when I'm cutting is pretty much, it's just at about 0.3 grams per pound of lean mass, or 0.2 to 0.25 grams per pound of body weight. So that's totally fine for health reasons. There's no reason to be going above that, really, unless you just enjoy it. So my fat intake doesn't change. My protein intake doesn't change. It's about 1 to 1.2 grams per pound. And yes, that's a little bit on the high end, but that's based on research done with athletes in particular, and lean athletes. And the leaner you get, the more you can benefit from a bit higher protein intake in terms of preserving muscle. So it's my carbs that change. So I cut 25 grams of carbs from my daily intake, and I do that for 7 to 10 days, and then I do it again, and I do it again, and so forth until I'm done cutting. And for me, what I find is when I do that, it each time I cut, it just keeps my weight loss at about 0.5 to 1 pound a week, which is exactly where I want to be, in terms of losing fat. And I lose very little muscle, if any. If I lose any muscle, I can't tell. I can't see it in the mirror, and I can't see it in the gym, because by the end of my cuts, which I generally cut for about 10 to 12 weeks, I'll usually have lost a few reps in the gym, but nothing major. And then once I start reverse dieting, which is basically the reverse of cutting my calories like that, I start adding food back in slowly and steadily, that strength comes right back. So if I have lost any muscle, and it's so negligible, you can't even, it's irrelevant. So that's the way that I like to do it. And, you can only cut your calories so much. I don't like to go much below my BMR. So this is because I just know my body and I've done it enough. And this is part of the process for you, is learning your body and learning your ranges, and in terms of calorie intake. And you may not need to reduce your calorie intake for 8 weeks. I've emailed people with that just seem to have very resilient metabolisms, and very resilient they don't have they have less of a reduction in energy expenditure than I do. So and I've spoken with people that don't have to reduce intake at all. That the lucky ones that they just start with their deficit and they just eat. They just stick to their initial deficit number for whatever it is, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, and then they're done and they just bring their calories back up and they're good to go. So that might be you as well. But if you do have to reduce, that's a safe way to do it. Is once things are getting too slow, you're losing too little's changing over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, reduce your daily carb intake by 25 grams, and then see over the next week, what does that do for you? And then if you the reason why I'm cutting my calories each week is that's also just because I've kind of done it enough and I know my body that if I do that, well, I guess I have to explain the whole thing to make it make sense. So like my body fat right now is probably about 8%, give or take, maybe 9. It kind of fluctuates. It's kind of hard to tell once you start getting into that sub 10%. You kind of go by readings, more than like I know my caliper readings but it's going to be give or take 8%. Now, if I wanted to cut down to 6%, let's say I want to get really lean for a photo shoot or something, I just know that takes about 10 weeks. So I'm going to go 6 weeks at my initial deficit and then 4 weeks of reducing, and then I'm going to be done. But if I had more fat to lose, then again, I would have to, let's say I were at 15% and I wanted to get down to where I'm at now, 8%. That's going to be a bit longer. That'll probably take 12, well, let's see, if I needed to lose 50, it'd probably take about 12 weeks, maybe in as much as 14 weeks. And in that case, I wouldn't just go for 6 weeks and start cutting my calories because I wouldn't have to. The point is, once you're at that point where that initial deficit isn't cutting it anymore, you're on the clock in a sense of how long you can go before it's time to reverse diet your metabolism back up, and then if you need to lose more fat, go back into a deficit. And then for my body, I've found that that's a 4 to 6 week clock there. So once I'm at that point, so if I started my cut around 2,400 calories and I get to that point where 2,400 calories is just not doing anything anymore, then I know that I have about 400 to 500 calories of reduction that I can make, which puts me a bit below my BMR, but it would just be for the last week or two, and then I would reverse diet back up. So that's kind of how I play it, and that's because I know my body, and that's something that you can use as a rule of thumb. But again, you're going to want to see how long can you go for with that initial deficit, before it stops producing any results. And once you're at that point, then you just know that you are going to have to eat less if you're moving as much as you can, if you're doing as much exercise as you healthily can. And you kind of are like, so let's say you did that 100 calorie cut, and then it buys you 2 more weeks of some changes, enough of a change on the scale to make a difference. And then now you have to cut again. Maybe that only gets you a week or whatever. So the point is, you're on that clock. You have to reduce your intake. And I do recommend that you stop at your BMR or slightly below it. I'll go as much as 10% below my BMR for my last week or two. I'm not going to sustain that intake for a long period of time, but if I have that last week or two and it's like, well, let's just squeeze the last, if I can squeeze 1 more pound of fat out of that, okay, cool, and there's no negative side effects to it. So that's the whole answer, and I think I've covered everything, but obviously if you have any other specific questions, you can comment here on the video, or you can comment in the blog post or whatever, and I'll respond. Which now takes me to this other question, which is from Jenny from Louisiana, and she asks, or she says, what does the research show regarding the long-term health effects of bulking and cutting? Is it detrimental from a health standpoint to do many bulk cut cycles even if done properly? Good question, and good segue from the first to this one, in that there are no negative health effects. There's even a few studies that I've seen that show that straight yo-yo dieting, which is like where you starve the shit out of yourself and then binge the shit out of yourself over and over, doesn't impair your metabolic health. Your metabolism is actually still fine, which is good news for people that have done that, because kind of the mainstream one of the mainstream pitches to sell you things is that if you've yo-yo dieted, you've caused metabolic damage, and you have to do this special thing or take this supplement or read this book or whatever to fix your metabolic damage, and that's just not true. What you're seeing with very overweight people, one of the reasons why, and this is kind of a mystery to them and to other people, how can someone be so overweight but they eat so little? So people assume, they must have damaged their metabolism, from their yo-yo dieting, because a lot of overweight people have tried to yo-yo diet, unsuccessfully, and they think, the yo-yo dieting must have, screwed up their metabolism. No. It's that the average overweight person or very overweight person, they don't burn shit for energy. They don't exercise regularly, or if they do, it's very, very low intensity. Maybe they just walk for 15 minutes. And research shows that, of course, you're not going to burn much energy just walking for 15 minutes anyway, but your body becomes more efficient to that low intensity or with that low intensity exercise. So over time, it actually burns less and less energy doing that walking. So the point is, it doesn't cost much energy to be fat. Especially if you just sit at a desk all day and then go home and sit on the couch, what you're looking at is your basal metabolic rate, which is a major factor in the basal metabolic rate. I mean, the primary factor is actually your big organs like your brain, liver, and stuff. But after that, it's the amount of muscle mass you have. So if you don't have much muscle, and you're not very, you don't exercise regularly, it doesn't matter how overweight you are. Fat is not a metabolically active tissue. It doesn't cost energy really to be fat. And that's really what you're seeing. So you're seeing someone that has very little muscle. They look very large, but their basal metabolic rate is quite low, and their daily energy expenditure is quite low. And they eat very calorie-dense foods. Even if they're healthy foods, they can still be very calorie dense, like very fatty type of foods, for instance, oils and nuts and avocado, and go to Whole Foods and see what some of these people put into their salads. I mean, you're looking at like 1,200 calorie salads because of the cheese and nuts and avocado and the creamy dressing. Oh, but it's a salad, it's healthy. Yeah, well, whatever. It's a fucking 1,200 calorie salad. And that salad alone, that 1,200 calories, could be 75% of their total daily energy expenditure right there. Then you add in some caloric beverages throughout the day. Maybe it's some soda, maybe it's some juice, maybe it's some milk. And then you add in a big dinner, and they can be in a surplus. They could be gaining weight just from eating 2 meals a day with a couple snacks. And that's really what you're looking at. You're looking at people that they just eat more energy than they burn, and they need to turn that around, and they need to get active so that and be smarter with their food intake, so they can burn more energy than they eat. So back to the question here. Now, of course, yo-yo dieting, being overweight is very unhealthy. So there are a lot of negative health effects from the fact that yo-yo dieters are often overweight, but the yo-yo dieting itself is actually not causing problems necessarily. And so now applying that to maybe people more like us that are more working on our fitness. You don't have to be like super fit, obviously, but you're exercising regularly, and you're either dieting to lose weight, or maybe you're already at your ideal weight, so you're just kind of maintaining. Bulking and cutting, there are no negative health effects associated with gaining and losing fat, especially when you manage it properly. And my general recommendations on that for men is that you kind of hang out in the 10 to 15, maybe 16, 17% if you want to stretch it, body fat range. For women, I would say 20 to 26, 27, meaning that as a guy, if you are bulking, then I would recommend that you cut it off at about 16, 17% body fat, because at that point your insulin sensitivity starts going to shit, and you're just going to get less and less out of your training. You're much better off than flipping to an aggressive fat loss type of routine, getting rid of that fat that you gained, preserving the muscle, getting back to about 10% body fat, and repeating that until you have the size that you want. Until you basically feel a little bit big at 10%, like uncomfortably big. That's me. Like if I were to go gain, 5, 6, 7 pounds of fat, I don't like how my body looks and feels. I feel too big. Like my clothes don't fit me right, and it's just kind of the look. I don't want to have a bodybuilder look. I want to have a more athletic fitness model type of look, and for me, that's about the size that I have now. I could use a little bit more shoulders and calves. But even my upper legs, I mean, I already kind of like certain jeans, forget about it. I can't even get them over my quads. So whatever, there are little like things to consider like that if you are not just trying to maximize size. So when you're doing that though, when you're managing, there's nothing wrong with gaining some fat and losing fat. Nothing wrong with it at all. No negative health effects whatsoever. And especially if you are managing it in those body fat ranges, you're maintaining your insulin sensitivity. There's just no reason, something you can do for your entire life if you wanted to. However, I think it's worth noting that like the big picture, in my opinion, is you do that for however long it takes. For most guys that want to go from like normal to a fitness model type of physique, it's going to take 2 to 3 years of bulking and cutting and doing it right, like not screwing around on your diet for long periods of time, not missing training for long periods of time, pushing yourself in every workout, like really being focused and really tracking your numbers, progressive overload. You're really working on getting stronger over time, trying to work up those reps, work up that weight. It's not that it's hard. It just takes a bit of work and it takes some focus. You can't just go in the gym and you could have gotten 3 more reps, but whatever, you just rack the weight anyway. And then in your diet, like, oh yeah, you should have tracked those 3 days of intake because you have no clue. You just ate whatever you felt like. I understand that maybe can feel kind of enjoyable in the moment, but just know that you're kind of sacrificing your long-term gains if you do stuff like that. If you really want to make sure that you get the results that you're looking for, you need to really be on point with your diet, meaning that you need to know your numbers, where they need to be. You need to be hitting those numbers you have small margins of error there, but you need to be right where you need to be basically. In your workouts, you have to push yourself hard in your workouts. You have to be mentally focused, mentally there. You have to make sure you're sleeping enough so your body can recover, and also so you have that energy and you have that focus for your workouts. And you have to really hit every set with that goal of beating what you did the previous week. That's your goal of every workout, is to do at least a little bit better. I mean, if you think about it, if you just did 1% better in every workout, for instance, then think of the percent what you'll have achieved after a year, after 365 days, right? Where obviously it's not 365 workouts, but you get the point. So you do that. You get the size that you want, the overall proportions, and the look that you want, and then you maintain it. And that's kind of where I'm at now, where I have the size and the look that I want, and so I'm really not trying to gain much more size. I do like training hard. I like training heavy. Unfortunately, there's a catch-22 there, because as a natural weightlifter, the most important thing is that you are getting stronger over time. If you want to be building your muscles, you want to be building your strength. When you add drugs into the mix, then it changes. In fact, a lot of guys on drugs that are well informed and open about it and have spent years as a natural weightlifter before getting on drugs will talk about how when they were natural, they had to emphasize that heavy compound weightlifting to really make gains. When they got on drugs, the heavy compound stuff, it became dangerous because their muscles were getting very strong, but their tendons and ligaments were not, because that's not how the drugs work. They improve muscle strength and performance, but not tendon and ligament strength and performance. So, that's where you can get some pretty nasty injuries, because maybe your muscles, you feel like you can squat, 550 pounds, or you can bench 450 or bench 400 or whatever, but the supporting structures in your joints and everything that supports the muscles and that the muscles attach to and move can't actually handle that weight, and you don't know that until it's too late. You don't know that until you're trying to push all that weight and you feel something go in your shoulder and you're like, whoa, and then that's it. So that's why guys that are on drugs that try to do a lot of that heavy weightlifting, you'll run into a lot of injured shoulders, injured knees, injured backs from heavy deadlifting, from heavy squatting, whatever. And guys on drugs that know better what they're doing, they're much more, it's not that they don't lift heavy, but they do it sparingly. And a lot of their training now is high rep stuff. And anyways, you'll find that if Like I know that guy Rich Piana, for instance, has talked about that. He's very open about his drug use, and he's talked just about this actually specific thing, that when he was natural, heavy compound weightlifting was the key to building that base, that foundation of muscle. And then when he got on drugs, he found that one, it was dangerous, and two, his body responded better to just doing massive amounts of reps. Every set 50 reps, stuff like that. And I've spoken with quite a few other guys just privately that, are on drugs and have had that same experience. So as a natural weightlifter, though, you're going to have to emphasize that heavy compound lifting. So anyways, coming back to me, I like training heavy and I like getting stronger, but if I keep on doing that, that means that I'm going to have to be in a slight surplus with my calories. I'm going to have to, if I want to keep on getting stronger, then I will inevitably get bigger. And I kind of don't want to. I don't want to be like 5 years later, because I probably, my natural, looking at where I'm at with my numbers and stuff, I probably could gain maybe another 10 pounds naturally. And it comes slow, because at this point, 2 to 3 pounds of gain a year is really all I can hope for. So, over the next 4 years, I could probably be 10 pounds heavier. But I wouldn't really want to be 10 pounds heavier. Think about it. When you think about muscle and pounds, think about it a steak. Think about a 16-ounce steak, a pound of muscle. Now, 10 of those, you know what I mean? That's quite a bit. Like I would be pretty big. And so what I don't want is, I kind of don't want that to creep up on me over the years, just because I continue to do, what I know would work. But I kind of don't want 5 years from now to, like right now, I'm 6'2" is my height, and I weigh about 100, like in the morning, no food, me or whatever, I weigh about 190 to 191. And my weight's always been a little bit low. It's kind of strange actually. Because it's not that I don't have any legs, or, I don't know, maybe I have like light bones or something. I do have small bones, that's for sure. Like I have I think a 6.5 inch wrist, for instance, and my ankles are tiny. It's just, I don't know, my body type. But I wouldn't want, let's say 3, 4, 5 years from now to be at this body fat percentage and being like 205. It's just not the look that I want. So anyways, you get to that point though where you have the body you want, and then you decide, for maintenance, you have also options. I just like heavy weightlifting, so that's what I continue to do. But I know people that have used a lot of heavy compound weightlifting, like my Bigger, Leaner, Stronger program, or for women, Thinner, Leaner, Stronger, to kind of build that body they wanted. And then they go and do things that they find are fun. Like some guys get into CrossFit. And they start doing CrossFit type of workouts, or they taper down on their heavy weightlifting. They do 2 or 3 heavy weightlifting workouts a week, and they do a bunch of body weight stuff because they always wanted to be able to do a bunch of cool body weight stuff. Or they just work out less, period, which gives you more time to live and do other things, where, I could maintain my physique on 2 or 3 workouts a week. I don't do that because I kind of enjoy working out, and that there are other benefits for me. I just, it's good for my mind, and it's a good way to start my day. But you get that flexibility, and it doesn't take nearly as much to maintain the muscle and physique that you've built, as opposed to getting there. So I guess that's kind of the long answer on that one. And I'm going to cut it off here. I hope you found this podcast helpful. And again, please do go to muscleforlife.com/ask-Mike-anything. Submit your questions. Go vote up other people's questions that you like. Vote down the ones that you don't like. And so when I come back around to the next Q&A, I have a new batch of fresh questions to address. And also, speaking of Q&As, also, I do a live Q&A over at legionathletics.com/Q&A, which I think, hold on, let me just make sure that's the right URL. We do that, I do that once a month at the end of every month, and I just take live questions. We do it using Ustream, and yeah, that's it. Legion, Legion, athletics.com/QA. You can sign up for the June one, which is going to be June 24th. And for an hour and a half, we just live chat. Jeremy goes through all the questions, and he shoots over ones to me. And, we just we talk about whatever the people want to talk about. It doesn't have to be health and fitness. Some people ask me business questions. Some people ask me personal questions, whatever. I don't care. I'll answer anything. So, I'm going to sign off here. Thanks again, and see you on the next podcast.